In Place of a Curse by John Ciardi. At the next vacancy for God, if I am elected, I shall forgive last the delicately wounded who, having been slugged no harder than anyone else, never got up again, neither to fight back, nor to finger their jaws in painful admiration. They who are wholly broken, and they in whom mercy is understanding, I shall embrace at once and lead to pillows in heaven. But they who are the meek by trade, baiting the best of their betters with the extortions of a mock helplessness, I shall take last to love, and never wholly. Let them all into heaven, I abolish hell, but let it be read over them as they enter. Beware the calculations of the meek, who gambled nothing, gave nothing, and could never receive enough. So I memorized poems. It came out in that jumpstart storytelling that I'm a poet, and when I find a poem that I admire and like, I memorize it. It's a way for me to incorporate it, quite literally. My breath, my lips shape those words, and I learn from it in a way that I don't if I just read the poem on the page or even hear it aloud. So for me, it really is a learning experience. It's one thing, though, to recite a poem at a poetry reading where people are expecting poetry, and another to recite one at a symposium on the business of lifelong learning. And it felt like a risk to me to recite a poem here, and that's precisely why I wanted to do it, because it felt like a risk. And for me, risk is what drives learning, that we're willing to move beyond what we already know and can do. And so I wanted to take that risk. I also wanted to do it because poetry is very important to me, and I wanted to bring my whole self to the symposium, because I think that's when I learn the most, when I'm really fully engaged as my full self. Sometimes it can feel like oversharing or off topic when we talk about our interests or activities aside from our professional work, but for me those are the details that often are the most memorable. It's what allows me to connect with you as you, and to make that more than a name on a roster, to really have some sort of meaningful connection. So I wanted to recite a poem for those reasons, and I chose the Ciardi poem in particular because he addresses risk-taking in that poem. I mean, the speaker in the poem has great disdain for the meek by trade, the people who get slugged and are down on the ground and refuse to get back up, to keep learning, to keep living. And so I would encourage us all to try over the course of the next 2 days to not be meek. Let's be fully here. Let's be willing to gamble a lot, to give a lot, and then thereby to gain a lot in exchange. So we are here at a symposium dedicated to the business of lifelong learning. And Jeff and I put a lot of thought into the design of the symposium, how to put together these next 2 days, and also around the pre-content and how we can maximize our time here together. Now, I know not all of you have read all of the emphatically recommended readings. I know not all of you have read even some of the emphatically recommended readings, and that's okay. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. It'll be your own little secret. But what I will say is if you did take time to read some or all of the emphatically recommended readings, thank you for making that effort. Thank you for taking that time. Hopefully you were rewarded as you read, and I think that the reading that you did will position you to get the most out of these next 2 days as well. And then I'll also just say, if you didn't read all of them or any of them yet, the opportunity hasn't passed. You could certainly read those as a follow-up to the symposium. They will help to reinforce some of the things you will do and see over the next 2 days, and I think they'll add a certain depth to your experience here even after the fact. But as we were planning the symposium, Jeff and I drew on Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning, quite a bit. And those of you who read that emphatically recommended reading or part of it or a synopsis of it know that that book really shows us that the way we think learning happens is often just based on our own experience, that we teach the way we were taught, and that it's a lot of that really isn't grounded in any evidence that that's the best and the right way to teach. So there's a lot of implicit focus on effective learning that's built into the symposium, built into the next 2 days, but we don't have a lot of explicit focus on, learning theory, effective learning. We don't have sessions focused just on that. So I just wanted to take a few minutes here at the beginning to talk about 5 key ideas from Make It Stick and how we applied them to the symposium. First one is prior knowledge. And so, this is the idea that what we can learn is in large part based on what we already know. So if you think about something like trigonometry, you need to know a little bit of algebra and geometry before you can do that. If you want to write a book, you need to know a little bit about grammar and sentences and paragraphs before you can do that. And so for us, the pre-content, the emphatically recommended readings and other pre-content, was a way to address what is a known issue with adult learning, which is that you all come from such varied backgrounds, and in some ways that's incredibly valuable because you're bringing all these different perspectives and experience to the room. But it also means that it can be hard to teach because we don't know exactly what you know versus what you know. And so by providing some pre-content, we were hoping that people could come in with some at least shared concepts and shared ideas around that. The second idea from Make It Stick that I want to talk about is elaboration. So this is just the idea that the way we learn is by connecting the new material to what we've already learned, and that we do that by putting that learning into our own words. And so part of what we're going to do over the next 2 days is offer reflection questions and get you to be thinking about the experience. That's an opportunity for elaboration. We've already given you that opportunity at the Jumpstart Storytelling, so that's part of why we're doing that. The third idea is retrieval, and Jeff touched on that just a little bit, that we know that the more effortful the retrieval, that pulling up the learning from memory, the stronger the learning becomes. And so this is something as easy as, essay questions being more effective than multiple choice because there's more effort involved there. You can't just kind of guess, okay, I'm going to go with C. And so again, I think that the reflection questions that we're going to give you over the next couple of days, those are going to be opportunities for you to do some of that retrieval, to pull out what you've been learning. The fourth idea is spaced practice. So we know that one-shot learning is not effective. An event like this, 90% of it is lost after 30 days. There have been studies done to prove that. So 90% gone in 30 days. But that's if you aren't practicing. That's if you aren't revisiting. And so part of what you want to do is make sure that you're revisiting these ideas. We're going to have some post-content that's going to help us keep the learning going after these couple of days. And actually, how big the gaps between the practice, they don't always have to be very large. I mean, even with what Seth did this morning with the Jumpstart Storytelling, you told the same story twice, and even in that short span of time, you told it a little bit differently, you knew a little bit more, you learned a little bit more from that experience. And then interleaving is the fifth and final idea that I wanted to talk about. And there's just been so much preference given to massed practice in our culture. So this is the idea that, we're going to only learn about X. And once you master X, you go on to Y. So in Make It Stick, they give the example of baseball. And so they have hitters that are only thrown curveballs until they can hit those curveballs really well. And then they're only thrown fastballs until they can hit those really well. Well, the problem is in a game, you don't know if it's a curveball or a fastball coming to you. So really, the hitters that learn more are the ones that, in practice, are thrown a variety of pitches. So we put together what we think is a flexible framework around the themes of reach, revenue, and impact, these 3 things that we think are important in the business of lifelong learning. We put together this framework of 4 threads of we need to be thinking about marketing. We need to be thinking about strategy. We need to be thinking about technology. We need to be thinking about learning. So we put together that framework, but we very consciously decided, we're not going to split these out into tracks. We want to keep them together because we want to keep these themes and threads interwoven. So that's a little bit of insight into the design of the symposium. So again, aside from these few minutes here, most of what you're going to see about effective learning from here on out is going to be more implicit rather than explicit. We're going to be trying to do more of the walking the walk rather than talking the talk. And as part of that, we're going to take some missteps. We know that. We're going to be watching and see what's most effective. We're going to see what doesn't work. And we invite you to tell us too, what's working, what's not. And we hope that that can really be more of a conversation than something written down on a comment card. We want you to be active participants. We want it to be a conversation. And so, we're taking some risks. We hope you are willing to take some risks. And I think that's a good segue to what we want to do next, which is a hot seat.